a lot of energy when we're in that fight or flight place. And the underlying implication is we're threatened, we're in survival mode, and that takes a lot of energy. And we just feel it in our bodies and our muscles. So the more we can relax and be at ease and be balanced with the way things are, I think the more we can kind of align our actions with what our deeper intentions are.
Yeah. So I guess on a similar vein of that, and your book Habit Swap, how would you propose that somebody listening to this who wants to be more mindful, particularly during this time in history, swap out some, let's say, nervous, unhealthy habits for a mindfulness habit? And how would you go about doing that right now?
Now, one of the things that I think is important is, I call it a bedrock habit, and that's the habit of being mindful, and particularly the habit of meditating. Mm-hmm. If you develop the habit of meditating, and it doesn't have to be, an hour a day, it could begin with 5 minutes, and allow that time to be a time where you put aside everything else, as much as you can for that period, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, and you just practice being present with whatever's coming up. You can be aware of your breathing. What you'll tend to see is you'll tend to notice different energies, of wanting something, or being annoyed about something else, or going off into fantasies or whatever. Mm-hmm. And we can just it's basically a training of our minds. It's a training of our minds to be present. And the more we can cultivate this quality of being present, the more we can bring this quality into our daily lives, and the more we can begin to kind of shine the spotlight on our habits. Because if we don't have some level of calm, some level of balance, some level of awareness, we're just going to keep acting out the patterns. But if we can bring that awareness to, okay, look at our intentions. How do I want to live? How do I want to spend my days? We're all, living in very different situations. Given the situation you're in, I'm in, we're in, how do I want to live? And what matters to me? What would be a helpful, beneficial way of spending my day? And then we can then make choices. You can say, okay, I want to do more of this. I want to take more walks. I want to do some exercise. I want to, do some worthwhile reading or whatever. So to make choices and organize ourselves in that way, because if we don't have some sense of intention and some sense of a plan, I don't mean overdoing it, but having some sense of doing, I want to do this, I want to do this, then what we'll do is our day will just gravitate towards, whatever we've done, and wherever our energies, and often it's anxiety and nervousness and restlessness, wherever they take us. And that will often be in unhealthy directions. For example, where we're feeling anxious and antsy and, I've been in too long. And, you want to comfort yourself because that's not a nice feeling. Mm-hmm. So what you do is, many of us do. We go to the fridge, or we go to the freezer, or we go to, whatever will comfort us for a while. And so the more we can bring awareness into our life, into our day, make choices, kind of shine the light more on our actions, on our habits particularly, then we can kind of say, okay, what would be a good way if there is something I'm doing? I was talking to somebody on an interview in the last couple of days. He said his habit was going, and eating a bagel when he's feeling kind of anxious or whatever, and he just eats too many of them. And one thing you could do is, if you're eating too many bagels or too much ice cream, think about it and say, okay, maybe this is not something I want to be doing so much of. Then, when you go to the market, you choose to buy something else that's going to be more healthy. You kind of think of that habit in advance. And if there aren't bagels there, or if isn't ice cream there, then you can't, that's not something you can do. And you can make more healthy choices in that way. And another thing about it is I think it's really important with habits is to be kind to ourselves, and not not hold a stick over ourselves, because that's not a good way of beating ourselves up. Oh, I've got to do this. Oh, I'm bad if I don't do it. Be kind to yourself. If you want to change a habit and then you lapse, meet that with kindness, but then reinforce or recommit to the healthy behavior. Rather than what we often tend to do is to beat ourselves up, and that actually tends to be counterproductive. We have a sense of, if I think I'm a failure, then I'm not going to be likely to do a very good job of giving something up or starting a new habit. The more we can be kind to ourselves, the more we recognize, we're all human. We make mistakes. Doesn't mean we don't, have maybe regret it, but then we move on. We say, okay, I'm going to commit to, that exercise regime, or not eating that unhealthy thing, or not having that extra glass or two of wine at the end of the day, or, all the different things we do.
Right. Although that extra glass of wine does sound pretty good. So in your own practice, let's say that someone listening to this is like, okay, I completely agree. I want to create let's say my day around healthier habits. Do you, after they kind of review this, do you recommend that they write it down and schedule out their day, or how do you approach the actual implementation of this mindfulness practice?
Yeah, I mean, what I do is in the last year or year and a half is I've taken to using the thing it's kind of getting better known now, or fairly well known now. It's called bullet journal. I don't know if you've heard of that. It's and I call it mindful journaling.
Mm-hmm.
It's a basic good way of organizing, where you can use a simple notebook, or something much more elaborate. But what I do, the main thing I do, is I write down the main things I want to do during the day, including, I've got an interview, I've got a class to teach, I've got to prepare for a workshop. But as well as that, I want to take a walk, I want to go to the gym, not now, but when, in regular times. I want to meditate, once or twice during the day. And what I do is just kind of put a dot for them. And when I've done it, I put a circle around it. So I've done that. It's like a sense of achieving the things, that I'm wanting to do. But what's important is it also, within this approach, is you can also have the big picture things in your life. So, I'm committing to, listening to talks, one a day. And I'm kind of thinking about, how I'm changing and how I'm growing through listening to these particular talks. So that's a whole section on its own. And I look at, I can have a section for finances or health, So the main thing being that there's an index at the beginning, and I can know where all these things are, and I just kind of write them down. So that's just one method, but having some way in which you organize your day and your time. It doesn't have to be rigid. It doesn't have to be down to the finest detail, but just, what are the main things I want to do today? And to, maybe say, I'm going to put a couple of hours in here, or half an hour in here to do that. And to commit to doing that. For me, every day I make sure I meditate. I make sure I take some walks. I make sure I listen to some thoughtful, reflective, a book or a talk or something like that, to make sure that those things are in place, that I do some exercise as well as the walking, and so that there's a level of intention and consciousness in how I spend my day, rather than just leaving it up, like a leaf in the wind of like whatever comes up, and I don't mean at all that the approach I'm suggesting isn't the kind of rigidity. You've got to, have everything marked out and planned out. And there's certainly space for just doing whatever the heart wants to do. And that can be built in as well, that everything doesn't have to be planned. But for me, if I don't have some level of organization like this, then I will tend to kind of act out more. My actions will be more habitual and unconscious, and often won't be what I really want to be doing. Mm-hmm. At that moment, that's kind of where I'm gravitating.
Sure. Talk to me about fear, especially about, nowadays, a lot of people are unsure about what's happening currently, what could happen in the future. So how, in your own practice, do you approach fear, and how do you deal with times when you're unsure or afraid?
It's a great question, particularly in the time we're living in, because there's a lot of fear and a lot of uncertainty on lots of levels. On the kind of health level, the whole healthcare situation, people getting sick, people dying, 100,000, I think today, isn't it, 100,000 people died from COVID-19, and then all of the economic consequences of the measures that have been taken. So what is it, nearly 40 million people applied for unemployment in the last 2-3 months. Mm-hmm. And then there's the political consequences. Where's this going to lead, and what might happen in the elections in November. So there's a lot of stuff coming up for all of us, in different ways. It's not the same for everybody, but it's very pervasive. It's very stressful. So the first thing I say is that fear and anxiety are natural responses, because it's a real situation. We're not just making this stuff up. That something could happen, in terms of one's health or one's loved ones. Something could happen in terms of the work, bringing in money, bringing in income. All of these things are real. They're having an impact, and they could, so in some way they're threatening to us. So it's natural, first of all, that fear will arise. Mm-hmm. The key, though, is how do we respond to the fear? Because if we respond to the fear with a lot of projections in the mind and a lot of catastrophizing and thinking, this might happen, but then, what if this happened? And we kind of just give a lot of energy and time to that, mm-hmm. that we might call catastrophizing about things, then we're going to suffer. It's going to compound itself. It's going to get worse and worse. And we'll be in a very stuck place. We'll tend to be very stressed out. Our lives will not be a lot of fun. There'll be, everything will be stressful, anxious, fearful. The alternative is to bring awareness to, I said it's natural for fear to come up, but if we can feel the fear, if we can allow ourselves to recognize, I notice I'm getting really tight, my breathing's getting shallower, I notice my muscles are tensing up, I'm noticing my thinking is getting really, really active, of like, this might happen and that might happen. And if I can just pause and see that and say, okay, notice that thought, but I don't need to follow it wherever it goes. I don't need to think more anxious, nervous, fearful thoughts. I can just notice that. And I can allow myself to feel what I'm feeling in my body. And the more I come back to the present moment, the more I can let these feelings come and go, then they don't run away with me. I don't have to go wherever the thoughts go. And so what awareness, i.e. mindfulness, helps us to do, it helps us to work in a skillful way, in a wise way, with fears that come up. So nothing wrong, nothing bad about fear coming up. But if we don't respond to it wisely, what we can easily do, we can get caught up in the ways that I talked about. Or we could blame it on other people. We could kind of project it in towards something else. They must be doing something. So rather than feeling what we're feeling, we push it out there in the world.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not a good way of dealing with it, because we've still got all of that, fear within us. We've just repressed it and we're kind of pushing it out on the world. And of course, the other thing we can do is we can get into bad,